Good evening. Welcome to the next shir number 8, about Basar b'chalav. We're in Yoredeya. We are talking about Simin, Pei Zayin, and Seifim, Beis, Gimel, and Dalid. And we are picking up on our discussion specifically about the Isser of Maras Ayin, which we're moving into next. We mentioned it briefly when discussing that there were certain types of bishul that were prohibited because of Maras Ayin, and we're now going to look at that sort of the last statement of the Ramah and other such things, which are the minim, the certain types of meats of Basar b'chalav, where there is bishul for Maras Ayin. In the Gemara, increases, Gemara brings down that dam daging, the blood from fish, if they put it together in a cup and you want to drink it, one's not allowed to drink it. Gemara says that the blood of fish, and also if you get blood or juices from chagavim, meaning the types of locusts, that's fine. You're allowed to drink that. So the question is, what's the steering between them? So the Gemara answers, there is a difference between when you put them together in a cup, and the other option is that you don't. Okay? So, and then the Gemara quotes Rav, and it says the same thing. So, therefore, people who see two different types of animals, and they're not sure if it's kosher, so they're concerned about that. And the Gemara brings down an example of people who walk on two legs. So they say, what about, like that? Is there an Isser on that as well? And the Gemara answers, no, that if you saw somebody who bit into some bread and it left some blood behind, you can simply scrape it off. Then the Gemara asks, well, what if a person, we just said that you're not allowed to eat it, what if you have blood in between the teeth? And the Gemara says, well, as long as it stays inside the mouth, you could suck it off with your teeth and swallow it. So therefore, the Gemara goes back to the original question, is why is dam dagim prohibited? So, why is it permitted actually? We said it's prohibited because you don't see scales in it. But if you see scales in it, then it's mutter. And so when he said it was usher, is when you don't see the scales in it. So the main din about these types of meat that are not included in the prohibition are things that we had previously discussed, are permitted things with milk. So, for example, fish and locusts. But now we're talking about dam, because this is going to introduce us something interesting called Maras Ayin. And so the prohibition of Maras Ayin is that a person shouldn't see you and say, you are drinking blood from a non-kosher source, such as drinking the blood of a behema. Because even if you do proper shechita on a behema, the dam, the blood, is still a Torah prohibition. And the Shach makes this very clear when he says this in Sifkat and Vav, that's the concern over here about these issues of Maras Ayin. Okay? Or that a person might do the other extreme, which is to say, I can eat blood. And this is actually the argument for when they started prohibiting people from making gebraks or from making stuff with matzah meal. There once was a Maisha Shahaya that someone was cooking fish or frying fish in matzah meal. People thought they could use flour. This that should happen to anybody, that they should use flour on Pesach. Okay, so that's the thing. Now that's why Rashi points out over here that when you see the scales in it, that's what's permitted, because you're not going to make those mistakes. This same permission is echoed by the Ran and the Rashba and the Torah. So we don't find the prohibition of Basar b'chalav Maras Ayin at all. Okay. So we don't find that. The Shas doesn't mention it. The first mention of it, basically, is the Rashba. He says that there should be a prohibition to have Maras Ayin on it. So we mentioned that previously, that the Ramah brings down this Shuvas of Rashba, and he's referring specifically to Chalavisha and Chalav Shkedim and those type of things. Okay, it's like breast milk or almond milk, or we have now oat milk. Those things are Maras Ayin. And so we find it first and foremost in the Rishonim. The Beis Yosef writes about this Rashba, that this seems to make sense. Okay? And he says that that's okay. However, the Ramah is not so sure. So we're going to see a little bit here about the Ramah makes this chiluk between the Raisa and the Rabbanans, but let's do one thing at a time. So, is there an Isser Bishul? Okay, do we prohibit the cooking together of things by Basar B'chalav? Because it might look like you're cooking Basar B'chalav. There's a separate Isser for that. Okay, so the Ramah, we say here, and this is in Sif Gimel, he says that we make the almond milk, okay, and we put the almonds with the milk, okay, when there's beef there. But when it's chicken, if it's only midrabanan, we don't do that. Okay, so he says that those two things are different. So by beef, we make the requirement of maras ayin because it looks like a deraisa, but by derabanan we don't do that. Okay, and that's when we start talking about the fish blood, going back to Simon Samach Zvav 66. Fine. So the Ramah says that Isser Rabbanan is mutter to cook. Okay, now the Marshal, he's going to disagree. Okay, and he says that by Basar Oif, even by chicken meat, you can't use almond milk without putting the almonds either in the actual cooking itself or putting it nearby. Okay, and just like we see by the blood of fish, that you have to have scales inside of it when you put it into a kli. The Taz echoes this by pointing out this statement of the Marshal, and he says these are all the same din, like the Rashba brings down. Okay, and so every way we can make people not make a mistake, we do that. But if you don't have almonds, the Taz says, then since it's almond milk, you can rely on the Ramah. Okay. So, and why does the Ramah disagree? Well, he says because by blood of fish, there is a prohibition. There's kares involved. So that's why you have to make sure it stands out that it's not that way. So that's why it supports his opinion. So the Shach comments on him and he says, okay, that's fine for blood, but we were asking a question when it comes to cooking these things together. So that would seem to imply that even though it wasn't a prohibition on beef, on a Torah level prohibition, right? So then you would also not need to put almonds in there. He doesn't make that comparison. So if it was something that was, as mentioned earlier in Sif Aleph, that it's not bishul deraisa, so then you don't have to have this blanket rule the Ramah brings down that there's always going to need to be almonds there. Okay, and so therefore he disagrees with him. Okay, now the Marshal, going back to the blood from the fish, he says that on certain days where people eat weird things. Okay, he says the common custom on Purim, for example, was to eat chicken cooked in almond milk. Okay, and he's saying there that you have to have almonds there, either while it's in cooking or while you're serving it. There has to be almonds there. Okay, why? Because that you don't want people to think that people could go ahead and cook milk and chicken together, even on a rabbinic level, like Rabbi Yossi Glili. Okay, so people make that mistake. Mamish heard this mistake literally just the other day. Someone thought that was the case. I couldn't believe it, but I literally heard this mistake, same mistake this week, that they said, oh yeah, there was a time period where people were eating milk and chicken together. And I said, yes, it goes back quite a few millennia. So therefore, we see that there's this machlekes, this dispute about what's considered maras ayin for midrabanan. Okay. There's a bunch of opinions brought down on Darchei Tshuva that the Ramah really does agree that there's maras ayin by midrabanan. Okay, why? So this is only a case of we're talking about bishul in your house. You're cooking in your house, and it's quiet, it's private. Fine, okay. So that's something else. That's why you don't really need to have the almonds in there, and there's no problem with maras ayin. But in a big meal, the Ramah would disagree. Okay, and he says that would be the case. So the Darchei Tshuva brings down the Tshuva as a whole. That's the difference between doing something privately in your own home versus having a big meal. So when you have a big Suda, I saw a case like this one time where someone served sour cream and they forgot to mark the par of sour cream as par of sour cream, and somebody decided to go crazy because they didn't market parve, maybe there's room to go crazy about it. So the Chora, maybe they saw the Star Tshuva before they went to this chasana and went crazy as a result of that. Okay, so there's three things to consider over here. So the Ramah, at the most basic level, that there's no prohibition of Maris Ayin unless you are violating some Torah prohibition. The Marshal, Taz, and Shach all hold that by rabbinic ones, such as chicken with almond milk, okay, that without having something that obviously says that it's almond milk, then you have to put almonds in it, okay? So you have to worry about Mars Ayin, even by the Rabbanan. Okay, and the Darech Tshuva say that there's this third opinion of the Ramah. That they say the Ramah doesn't agree when it's in a big public place. Okay, so what we can say is really there's two different ways of looking at the way Rashi kind of explained it. So, that maybe the blood from the fish looks like the blood of an animal, and some might say it's permitted to go ahead and eat blood. Okay, that's one situation to look at it. Okay, so that's one way to consider it. Okay, so there's a few other situations where Rashi talks about Maris Ayin, and he says this in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. He says that something that's permitted, and the rabbis say it's prohibited by Maris Ayin. Someone might say and think that he's doing something wrong. Okay, and Rashi also says a similar word in Beitza. Okay, he says that they might see you doing something. Okay, and they might think you're doing this thing wrong. So in the case in Beitza, might be doing malacha on Yom Tov. Okay, so there's a question of, is Maris Ayin something that we're looking at a person might himself be doing an Avera, or he knows he's not doing one, or you're considering Maris Ayin to be something that people will see you and go, oh, you're an avarian, right? You're a violator. That's the bad thing. And that's another possible issue. So there's which ways to go to either side of this machlokes, okay? And in such a case, they might think that maybe by an Isser or Rabbanan that might not be so strict, but that was the Ramah's opinion, and people disagreed with him. Okay, so what about nowadays? Could you go ahead and cook meat into some type of liquid that looks like milk? Okay, and what about things like margarine or other parve spreads that kind of look like butter? Okay, so, and to be fair, margarine actually is given a different color in the U.S., so that way it actually doesn't look like butter. So you have that argument, but maybe some people aren't so smart and they wouldn't notice it. So what do you have to say about this? So in the Sefer Das Torah, he brings down that with certain types of nut milks over there. Okay, he says that they're not going to consider certain types of things to be a problem, because if you don't look like you're violating it, then you shouldn't be assumed that you are. If people don't know what it is, especially. Okay, so, and he brings this down by a case of doing some type of work on Shabbos. So he says that if it's clear that they're not violating the Isser, then you can go ahead and do it. Okay. He also there's another word of the Placey over here in the Kresu Placey, where he says that if you have a reason to assume that it's permitted, then there's no prohibition of Maris Ayin. So if you know that you're doing the right thing, then you shouldn't be assuming doing the wrong thing, and permits it without having to make a heker. Okay. And why is that the case? Because he said that even Rabbi Yossi Glili were permitted to have milk and meat together. So clearly he didn't hold of Maris Ayin in such a case. So the Sefer Body of Shulchan, which is a more modern Sefer, he brings down that in these situations they would aser all of these. However, in the Matnei Shulchan and other modern Sfarim, nowadays where things are very common, these prohibitions don't exist. and therefore you have to be concerned about it. And I personally said the Badei Shulchan, even though he's contemporary with the Madnei Shulchan, the Cheshav Ephod, and a few other Svarim, Archas Shulchan, who don't agree with that, his I'd say shita is sort of batal b'chayv. So one thing to really consider over here is to understand the yisod that we're learning from this Gemara in Krisis, which is that things that are essentially permitted, so the blood or the liquids that come from fish and from locust chagavim, okay, so we understand that they are permitted. The question is, they look too much like blood of a behemoth, and so therefore there should be a prohibition maris ayin on them. And so therefore we say there is such a thing, okay? And the reason why is because you might be violating a Torah prohibition. And that's explaining it in the way that the Shach kind of understands the sugya as well. Okay, and we saw that you need to have identifiers around them in those cases, such as with blood from fish, you have to have scales around it. And we said there's a lot of Rishonim who pass in that way, and it's brought in the Torah. Okay, but we don't find it by Basar Chalav, we find it in the Tshuvas Rashba. So the question is understanding this Tshuvas Rashba according to in the eye of Halacha. So it is a machlekes between the Ramah and other Achrayim as to whether or not maris ayin will apply to things that are prohibited midrabanan. So the Ramah agrees that this din about marking things off applies 100% when it's talking about beef and something like almond milk. But the Marshal and the Taz and the Shach, who are just bringing the Marshal to be fair, they all say you have to do it, even by Basar Eif, because they hold that way. Okay, and a lot of people say that even for the Ramah, there's reason to be strict and include it in all types of large pseudos and large gatherings. And in terms of things that are now well known to be pareve, most Achronim say that it's acceptable to put it at the table without a concern of people thinking you're violating a Torah prohibition and so on. But if there's reason to believe that there are some people who are just absolutely meshuggah out there, you should still mark things. Make sure to mark at the sour cream as pareve. If you're serving it at a fleshig meal, make sure to note that the milk that's on the table is pareve. One person said to me that if you leave the milk in the baby bottle, that should be a heker enough to know that the milk that's on the table is chalav isha, and that should suffice as well. And so that is a little bit of some insight into that. And we will take a look in our next year at more about this din of chalav isha and other things midrabanan. And there's quite a bit. There's just a little bit to say about it. And then we'll take a look at some of the halachas we've learned from all of these different halachas that we've gone through these laws, to apply them to some other things like eating fish cooked with chalav, which is an interesting trial in and of itself that comes up much later.